Okay, we're on 2008 Enterprise Server, and today we want to set up Active Directory. So I'm going to go ahead and log in, and my beautiful 3-year-old daughter Sarah is with me. Sarah, say hi. Sarah, what do pirates say? What do they say? Arr. All right. Um, in this case, Sarah wanted me to name the server after her, so we named the server Sarah. She wanted it to be a pretty name, and she's a very pretty girl, I must say. Okay, logged in here. Now, first thing I want to do, I want to make this a little bit more homely, if that's the right word. In other words, a little more comfortable to me. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Classic View under Control Panel. I want to go ahead and go here. I'm going to go to Classic Start Menu. I want to add the log off to the Start Menu. I want to get rid of the personalized menus, which I don't like. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to close this. And I want to go over here to my computer. Right-click Properties, Advanced System Settings. I'm going to want to go over here to Advanced and adjust for best performance instead of appearance. I don't understand. You just don't really need a beautiful shell or fancy graphics on a server product. I can understand on a workstation or a production machine, but the purpose of this is going to be a domain controller, to set it on the network, not to have a nice looking graphical interface, but to perform server functions and do them efficiently and well. So in this case, I think that's a nice option, just to be able to set it for performance. One of the things we want to do is take a look at our IP settings, and I'll tell you why. IP config all. Let's go up here, and we can tell that here we're set for DHCP. There's our DHCP server 192, let's say 8254. So we can see that we're on a Class C subnet. It's a private Class C network. We're subnetting on the third octet. There's 24 bits for our network address, 8 bits for our host. With the domain controller, you never want a static IP address. You don't want IPs to change. When records are created in DNS, SRV records, and A records, you want them to always map to the same IP address. So it's never a good idea to allow your domain controllers to have a dynamic IP. Give it a static IP. For that matter, even your member servers should not have dynamic IP addresses. They should have static IPs. We'll talk about a member server in just a moment. You could get around this if you have a DHCP server and you configured a MAC reservation. I suppose you could get around it that way. That way the same MAC address or server domain controller will always get the same IP address. But it's just better to give it a static IP. So let's do that. We'll go to networks, and this is not just domain controllers, but any server. If it's an Internet Information Services web server, if it's an FTP server, DHCP server, routing remote access server, VPN server, NAT, network address translation server. In this case, I'm going to uncheck IP version 6. We're not using that. And for IP version 4, I'm going to add my static address. It was a private Class C 192.168, subnetted in the third octet to 80. And 2 was what was leased to me by DHCP, so I'll just go ahead and use that as a static address, 192.168. That way we know we won't get an IP conflict. And for my gateway, I want to go ahead and go out 1. Now, I'm going to allow, when we set up Active Directory and I run DCPromo, I'm going to allow it to use, to set up DNS for me. So what you want to do is configure the server to be a DNS server to itself. And I can provide an alternate 168.80.81 to go to other networks or resolve other host names. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. And now I've modified my network settings. Now, you may ask, what's the difference between a domain controller and a member server? A member server is pretty much just a workstation, but with extra services. So, I may have a 2008 server set up that runs as a standalone web server, Internet Information Services server, a standalone certificate services server, a VPN server, NAT server, routing remote access server, whatever, DHCP, you name it. But it's, in this case, if I don't run DCPromo on it and it doesn't become a domain controller, it's not an integral part of Active Directory. It would act like a workstation with extra services. And so if I were to do that, it would look like this. Sarah's the computer name or the server name, and then some domain would be the domain I would join. And if I did it this way, then this would just be a member server. It would not be a domain controller. It would not be Active Directory. But that's not what we want today. Today we do want to create Active Directory. So we're going to go down here. We've got our static IP address, everything's set up. Copastatic Hunkadory got our host name. Now here's the deal. You don't want to change your host name after you run DCPromo. That creates all kinds of horrible problems. Microsoft allowed that in 2003. They didn't used to allow that in 2000. Once you ran DCPromo, you had to demote your domain controller to be able to change the host name. They decided to allow that in 2003, but boy, it created more problems than it was worth. So many people would run DCPromo and have all these SRV records and a global catalog or DNS, and then they would go change the host name of a domain controller, and just it would create problems finding it and replication problems and things like that. So my advice to you is figure out what you want to name your domain controller first, and then run DCPromo. Don't change the name afterwards. And also remember, it's that way with a certificate services server. Once you set up certificate services, you can't change the host name of the server until you uninstall certificate services. And that is just a security precaution to prevent counterfeits. In this case, we'll run DCPromo from the command prompt. I'm going to go through here. I could use advanced mode installation, but I want to use the wizard in this example. Now I have several options. If I had an existing forest, I could add a domain controller to an existing domain. And what that would do is I could either add it as a replicant at the same level, and it would serve as sort of a fault-tolerant or load-balancing domain controller in case that one failed, or I could create a new domain in an existing forest, and that could be a new domain tree, or even a subdomain of a previous domain controller or domain tree. In this case, we have not set up Active Directory, so I'm going to want to create a new domain in a new forest. I'm going to click on that. I'll go next. Now, here it's asking me to put in my fully qualified domain name. And the way that works is, well, let's use Microsoft as an example. If I start out at the right here, this is the most general part of the FQDN, or the address. And this is the most specific part. So what would happen is, out there on the internet, there are, after IANA, there are top-level DNS servers that have things like .com and .org and .mil, and they resolve, in turn, to DNS servers, in this case, that have an IP address for Microsoft's DNS servers. And then Microsoft's DNS servers would resolve to IP addresses for things like World Wide Web, or FTP, or Training, or Partner1, or MCP, or something like that. TechNet. So it would just, as you move from right to left, you go from more general to the more specific. So that's how that works on the internet. Now, how that would work in a forest or a domain, my host name would be to the far left. So here is Sarah. And then if I were in a subdomain, Caribbean, sorry, I meant to put a dot there, Caribbean, and then Pirates, and then ARG. And so this would be my forest name. This would be my domain tree or parent domain name, my subdomain name, and my host name. Again, the more general to the right, and then as I go from right to left, I get more and more specific until I actually get down to the host or the server's name. Now I just want to create the name of my forest in this case. So the FQDN of the forest root domain, I'm just going to set it up to be pirates.arrrgh, arg. And we'll go with that. Checking to see whether the new forest name is already in use. I'm going to let the wizard set up DNS. Now, DNS is paramount and very important, in addition to a static IP address. You can't have Active Directory without DNS. You need A records, pointer records, and SRV records to be able to map services, and to enable workstations and other servers to be able to find the global catalog server. When we set this particular domain controller up, remember it's going to hold all 5 of those operations master roles. So it'll be a RID master that hands out SIDs. It'll be a PD simulator that emulates the primary domain controller in the old NT setting, as well as controlling the timing for replication. It'll be the schema master controlling the schema, which is the scaffolding or the class structure of Active Directory that can be modified if you have schema admin privileges. It'll be the infrastructure master and the domain naming master to ensure that there are no conflicts or duplicate domain names within the forest.